The 11th hour before the hanging, a Lakota chief rode through the square with the truth. They give you a last meal, that's what they do. Mine was beans and a piece of corn bread that crumbled when I touched it. A deputy named Calhoun set it through the slot in the cell door without looking at me. I didn't blame him. Looking at a man who's going to be dead by noon takes something out of you, and Calhoun had probably done it before. I ate the beans, left the corn bread, sat on the bunk and looked at the wall. The wall had names scratched into it. I don't know who did the scratching, men who'd sat in this same cell before me, I suppose, waiting on the same thing I was waiting on. One of them had carved a woman's name so deep the plaster crumbled out around the letters. Margaret. I looked at that name for a long time, wondered if Margaret ever knew he'd done that, wondered if it mattered. Another man had scratched a date, October 14, no year, and under it just the word wrong. 2 letters gone into the plaster with what I imagined was the corner of a boot heel, or maybe a spoon. Wrong. I understood that. I'd have done the same if I'd had something to scratch with, except the date they'd set for me was tomorrow, and I hadn't decided yet if I wanted my last hours spent making a mark on a wall. My name is Cord Haller, was Cord Haller, whatever I am now. I'd been a lawman for 11 years, marshal, then deputy marshal, then marshal again in 2 different counties. I'd ridden the territorial circuit longer than most men lasted at the work. I knew what honest law looked like and what crooked law looked like, and I'd spent a good portion of my life trying to keep one from becoming the other. Lot of good that did me. The thing they said I did, killed a man named Denton Frey behind the grain exchange in Millhaven, took his horse and his saddlebags and left him face down in the alley. I didn't do it. That's not a thing I say to make myself sympathetic. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm telling you what happened because the truth is the truth, whether anybody believed it at the time or not. Frey was a land agent. Worked for a man named Chester Buell who was buying up half the territory one deed at a time and running the ranchers who wouldn't sell into the ground by other means, fouled wells, cut fences, a barn fire here and there. I'd been building a case against Buell for 8 months. Frey was the link. Frey had the receipts, the records, the signed orders that put everything back to Buell's hand. He'd gotten scared the way men get scared when they realize the thing they're part of is bigger and worse than they signed on for, and he'd put out word, quiet and careful, that he'd talk to the right man if the right man could give him something in return. A deal. A way out. I was the right man. I'd spent 3 months becoming the right man, building enough of a case that I could offer Frey something worth taking. We'd arranged a meeting, 8 in the evening behind the grain exchange, away from the saloons and the street traffic. Somebody knew. Somebody knew I'd got to Frey, and they moved faster than we did. And then Frey was dead in an alley, and I was found 2 blocks away with his horse's lead rope in my hand. I'd gone looking when he didn't show at the meeting point and found the horse wandering loose, and when they searched my room, they found $60 of his money in my boot. Money I'd never seen before in my life. Money that had been put there while I was out searching for a man who was already dead. 3 witnesses said they'd seen me arguing with Frey earlier that day. One of those witnesses, I later learned, worked for Chester Buell. At the time, I didn't know enough to call that out. The trial lasted 2 days. My lawyer was a young man from back east who kept tugging at his collar and losing his place in his notes, a man who'd never tried a case that had real money behind the other side of it and didn't know what that looked like until it was too late. The jury was out 40 minutes. The judge, a man named Holt who'd been on the bench in Millhaven for 16 years and who, I later found out, had borrowed a considerable sum from Chester Buell that he'd never repaid, sentenced me to hang. That was 3 weeks ago. I'd spent those 3 weeks writing letters. To the territorial governor, to the marshal's office in Cheyenne, to a judge I'd known in Casper who I believed was an honest man. I wrote them careful and plain, and I laid out every fact I had: the case against Buell, the setup, the witness who worked for Buell, the impossible convenience of the money in my boot. I don't know if any of them were read. Nobody wrote back. So I sat in the cell the night before the hanging and I made my peace with it. Or tried to. That's the other thing they don't tell you. Making peace with dying is harder than it sounds. You think you're there, and then you think about something small. A creek you used to fish as a boy, a certain bend in it where the water went shallow over flat rocks and the light came through the cottonwoods just right. The smell of coffee at first light. The way your horse would sometimes lean his head against your chest when you stood with him in the stall on a cold morning, like he was warming himself on you, or warming you, and it wasn't clear which. You think about those things and the piece flies off and you have to start over. I thought about a woman once. Not in the cell that night, I thought about a woman over the years, the way a man does when he's been alone a long time and the aloneness starts to have a weight to it, starts to have a shape you can feel in the room. I hadn't had much luck in that direction. The work didn't help. Hard to build something with a woman when you're gone 6 months of the year, and the months you're there you come home smelling like horses and trouble, and the worst of what people do to each other. One woman told me I'd married the badge before I'd ever met her, and she wasn't wrong. I hadn't argued the point. I didn't think about any particular woman that night. I thought about the creek and the coffee, and I looked at the name Margaret scratched into the wall, and I thought about whoever she'd been to, whoever had put her name there, what she'd meant to him in that cell, and whether he'd found his way back to her or whether the name was all that was left of it. Eventually, I put my head down on the bunk. I slept. I didn't expect to, but I did. The body does what it does. I woke to sound. Not the sound I expected, not boots on the stairs, not the deputy with the black hood. It was hooves, a lot of them, and then voices, and the voices were getting louder, and there was something underneath the sound, some quality to it that pulled me up off the bunk and to the window before I was fully awake. The window was high. I had to grip the bars and haul myself up to see out. The iron was cold in my palms. The square below was filling with people. Not townsfolk, or not only townsfolk. There were riders. A dozen of them, maybe more, Indian ponies mostly, and a few horses I didn't recognize. And the riders sat their horses with a stillness that told you they'd been riding since before dawn and weren't tired from it, just settled. And out front, on a gray horse so pale it looked like smoke in the early morning light, sat a man I knew by reputation, even if I'd never met him face to face. Tall Bear, chief of the Oglala band that kept their camp 15 miles north of Millhaven, up in the breaks along the Powder River. A man who'd kept the peace on his end of things through 20 years of bad treatment and broken promises that would have broken most men straight through to war. Tall Bear had not broken. He'd stayed. He'd negotiated. He'd bent when he had to and held when he couldn't bend any further, and his people were still there, still on their land, still intact, because of the care and the stubbornness and the long patience of this one man. He was not a young man. His hair had gone to gray-white and his face was lined deep, the kind of lines that come not just from weather but from carrying things. He sat that pale horse like he'd been born on it, like horse and man were one thing. And beside him, I held the bars tighter. Beside him was a woman, younger, maybe 30, maybe a few years either side of it, dark hair loose over her shoulders, dressed for riding in a blanket coat and leather leggings, and she had a rifle across her saddle that she carried the way a person carries a tool they know how to use. She was looking straight ahead at the jailhouse door, and her jaw was set in a way that told me she had not ridden 15 miles through the pre-dawn dark to be turned around at the door. I didn't know her. I'd never seen her before in my life. But she was looking at that jailhouse door like she intended to come through it, and something about the quality of that looking, the steadiness of it, the lack of any performance in it, made the back of my neck go tight. Calhoun appeared below. He came out the front of the jailhouse with his hand resting on his holster, and I could see him talking, see the set of his shoulders, the way a man holds himself when he's trying to sound official, and is not at all sure it's going to work. Tall Bear didn't move, didn't answer immediately, just sat his gray horse and let Calhoun talk, and when Calhoun finished, Tall Bear said something short and quiet. Calhoun shook his head, said something else. The woman reached into her coat and took out a packet of papers. She held it up. Even from the height of my window I could see it was thick, more than a page or two, more than a letter. A sheaf of documents held together with a strip of leather lacing. She spoke. She spoke directly to Calhoun, not loud, not pleading, just flat and certain, and I could see from Calhoun's posture, the way his shoulders shifted, the way his hand came off the holster, that whatever she'd said had changed something in the calculation he was making. He turned and went back inside. I dropped off the bars and stood in the middle of the cell. My hands had that cold feeling that isn't from cold. Not hope exactly. I'd been careful not to do hope. The letters had gone unanswered and the trial had gone the way it went, and I'd spent 3 weeks watching every avenue close, and I'd made the decision not to spend my last night on hope, because hope, when it comes to nothing, is a worse end than no hope at all. I'd made my peace, or tried to. But something was moving through me now that I didn't have a word for, something that had been absent so long I'd almost forgotten the shape of it. Feet on the stairs, more than one set. The cell door opened. Calhoun stood there with a look on his face like a man who has just heard something he's going to be turning over for the rest of his life. Behind him was the woman. And behind her, filling the doorway with his presence, not his size, he wasn't a tall man, but his presence, which was something different, stood Tall Bear. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the woman walked to the small table in the corner of the cell and laid the papers down. She spread them flat with her hands, smoothing each one carefully, and I noticed that her hands were steady, not a tremor in them. She'd ridden through the dark with these papers and walked into a jailhouse with a man about to hang, and her hands were entirely steady. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dark and level, and she looked at me the way a person looks at something they've been looking for and have now found. Not warm, not cold, direct. "You're Cord Holler," she said. "I am. My name is Winyan Washte. My father is Tall Bear." She said it without preamble, like establishing coordinates. 8 days ago, a man named Harlan Prout came to our camp. He was drunk and he was sick and he was dying from the sickness, the kind of sick that drink makes when it's gone on too long. He asked to see my father. He said he had something to confess. She touched the papers. Prout worked for Chester Buell. He was in the alley behind the grain exchange the night Denton Frey was killed. He saw it happen. He saw who did it, and he saw how your horse's rope and Frey's money were planted afterward, and by whom and on whose orders. She paused. He signed these statements before 3 witnesses, my father, 2 of our elders, and a white missionary named Garrett who has lived among our people for 12 years, and whose sworn testimony no court in this territory has yet disputed. I looked at the papers. My eyes weren't right. Something was wrong with my vision in that moment, some blurring I didn't acknowledge. "Prout died 4 days ago," she said. "Before he died, he told my father he couldn't go to his God carrying this on him. My father believed him." Tall Bear spoke then in Lakota first and then in English. "The man who did the killing was sent by Buell. His name is in there." I put my hand on the table, not to reach for the papers, just to have something solid. "Why," I said, my voice came out different than usual, rougher. "Why did you bring this here yourself?" She didn't look away. "Because my father is an old man and the ride is hard. Because I speak good English and he does not always. Because someone needed to bring it and I was the one who could." She said it simply, like it was obvious, and I suppose it was. But there was something else in it, something she didn't say, and I didn't ask about it then. The time for asking was not now. Calhoun had been standing in the doorway the whole time. He cleared his throat. "Marshal," he said, the old title, the one he hadn't used in 3 weeks, coming out of him before he caught it. "Holler. I need to take those papers to Judge Holt." "No," said Tall Bear. Calhoun blinked. "Not Holt." Tall Bear looked at me. He had the kind of eyes that have watched many things without flinching and have formed their own conclusions about all of them. "Is there another judge? A federal man?" "Casper," I said. "Judge Aldine, Federal Circuit." "Then we send for Aldine." Calhoun looked like a man trying to figure out where his authority began and ended this morning. "Sir, I can't just— the sentence is set for noon. There's procedure, there's—" "Then send someone to Casper fast," the woman said, "and delay the noon." "On what authority?" "On mine." Tall Bear's voice was not loud. It was something else entirely, the kind of quiet that's bigger than loud. "I am the authority of 15 years of peace between my people and this county. I am the authority of every treaty this territory has made with my band, which I have honored even when the other side did not. I am the authority of a dying man's sworn testimony before 3 witnesses who are prepared to ride to Casper, or to Denver, or to Washington if that is what is required." He let that settle. "The noon will be delayed. Send for Aldine." Calhoun stood in the doorway for another few seconds. Then he nodded once and went. I don't know everything that happened in the hours that followed. I know some of it from what Calhoun told me later, some from what I could see out the window, some from the woman herself over the days and weeks after. A rider left for Casper at a hard run before 7 in the morning. Tall Bear's men stayed in the square, all of them, not moving off, not spreading out, just present and still in the way that only a people with deep discipline can be present and still. The town came out to look at them. The word had gotten around before the sun was fully up. Something was happening. Something was wrong with the hanging. People came out of the houses and the businesses, and they stood in the square and looked at the riders, and the riders looked back, and nobody pushed and nobody flinched. I watched from the window when I could. Mostly I sat on the bunk. 3 weeks of making peace, and now I had to sit with the possibility that the peace was premature, and that was harder in some ways than the peace had been. Hope has an edge to it. Hope cuts. Chester Buell arrived at 9. He came into the square with 2 men behind him, men with the look of men who are paid to stand close and look unpleasant, and he went straight to Holt's office. He was in there about 20 minutes. When he came out, his face had the look of a man who'd gone in for reassurance and received something shakier than he'd wanted. He crossed the square and looked at Tall Bear on his gray horse, and Tall Bear looked back at him, and it was the kind of looking where everything is said without a word. And then Buell turned and left. I saw that from the window, and I felt something I recognized from years of this work. The particular feeling of watching a man realize the thing he built is starting to come apart, and knowing there's nothing he can do now to stop it, and watching him figure that out. The woman came back at 10. She'd gotten coffee somewhere from the hotel across the square, I found out later, where the woman at the counter had taken one look at her and poured without being asked and refused payment. She brought a tin cup through the bars and I took it. She leaned against the wall outside the cell. Her coat was open now. There were shadows under her eyes. "You didn't sleep," I said. "Not much." "You rode through the night." "Yes." The coffee was hot, and I held the cup with both hands. The warmth of it went up my arms. "You're not afraid," I said. It came out as an observation, not a compliment. She considered it. "I am afraid," she said. "It's different from you're afraid. Your afraid is for yourself. Mine is for my father and my people if this goes wrong." "What does going wrong look like?" "Buell uses it. Says we interfered with the justice of the county. Uses it to take more land from the northern range, push us further back, tell the territorial government we've become a problem that needs handling." She said it even, no heat in it, just the plain shape of a risk she'd already thought through before she rode here. "He has been looking for a reason for some years, a reason that would satisfy the people who have to approve the taking." I held the coffee. "Then you're risking more than I am." "Your risk is your life," she said. Yes, and your risk is. My people's home, she said. Yes. We sat with that. Then I'll ask again, I said quietly. Why? She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, Prout said your name before he died. Not just told my father about you, said your name, said, a man named Haller who was trying to do right. Said it like it was important. Like the fact of a man trying to do right and being hanged for it was not something to leave alone. She was quiet a moment. My father is not a man who leaves things alone when they are wrong. I am my father's daughter. That was all she said about it then. I drank the coffee. Judge Aldine arrived at 11:20. He'd gotten the message at his home in Casper, and he'd ridden through the night, not sent a clerk, not sent a deputy, ridden himself, through the dark and the cold. The kind of man who does that when he gets a message about a wrongful hanging is a certain kind of man. He was in the jail by 11:30. He read the statements without speaking, then read them again. He asked Calhoun 3 questions, short and specific, and Calhoun answered them and Aldine made a note. Then he looked at the signatures, at the witnesses' names, and he was quiet for a moment. He walked to the door of my cell and looked at me through the bars. Mr. Haller, he said finally, I've read your letters. I hadn't known that. I'd sent one to his court without expecting much. I've been looking into this matter for 2 weeks, he said, quietly on the side. I had the outline of it, but I did not have the piece I needed. It appears that piece found its own way here. He looked at the papers in his hand, at Tall Bear's name on the witness line, at the missionary's signature beneath it. Then he looked at Calhoun. Open it. The sound of the key in the lock. There are sounds you don't forget. That scratch of the key, the click of the bolt throwing back, the creak of the hinges on a cell door going outward. I stood in the cell and I waited until the door was fully open, and then I walked through it. Walked slow. I didn't want to rush it. Rushing would have felt like something was still behind me. Tall Bear was in the main room of the jailhouse, standing. He looked at me when I came through, and I looked at him. There wasn't much to say, and we both knew it. I put out my hand and he took it, and we shook once, firm and even, and that said what needed saying between 2 men who both understood what this morning had cost. The woman was behind him. She was watching me with those level eyes. I went outside. The sun hit me in the face, and I stopped on the steps of the jailhouse and just stood in it. Just let it land on me. The square was still full of people, townspeople and Tall Bear's riders both, and they went quiet when I came through the door and came down the steps. A few faces I recognized. The blacksmith, a rancher named Morse who'd been at my trial. Most of them were strangers or near enough. I didn't make a speech. I'm not built for speeches. I just came down the steps into the sunlight and stood in the square in the living world and breathed it in. Tall Bear's riders parted from me without being asked, and I walked to the edge of the square. Then I stopped. I didn't have a direction. My horse was in the livery, my gear was God knows where, and I was a man standing in the middle of his own life with no particular plan for what came next. The woman appeared at my elbow. She handed me something. My badge. The deputy marshal's star, the one they'd taken off me at the arrest, with a dent in the lower point where it had been dropped or handled rough somewhere along the way. Calhoun had it in his desk, she said. He thought you should have it back. I looked at it in my palm. The metal was warm. She'd been holding it. I don't know if I'm still a marshal, I said. Aldine said you are, she said. He also said Buell will be arrested this afternoon, that the man whose name is in the statements will be found, that Holt will very likely face the circuit court before winter. I closed my hand around the badge. Miss Washday, I said. Yes. I didn't know what came next in the sentence. Stood there with the badge in my fist and tried to find the words for what I was carrying and couldn't find them. I'd spent 3 weeks building a wall between myself and any version of living, because living had stopped being the plan, and now here I was on the other side of that wall, and I didn't know yet how to be there. She waited. She had a gift for it. She didn't fill the silence with anything, Just let it be there, let me have it. I'd made my peace with dying, I said finally, or near enough, and then you rode in with those papers and now I stopped. I don't know what I am now. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, you don't have to know today. Which was practical, which was entirely right. She turned to walk back toward her father, then stopped half-turned. My father will camp tonight on the eastern edge of town, she said. Before we ride back tomorrow morning, I would like to hear what evidence you had built against Buell. The case before Frey died. My father thinks there are ranchers along the Powder who were ruined the same way, land pressured, claims disputed, wells fouled. It may be useful. I'll be there at sundown, I said. She nodded and walked back across the square, and the crowd parted for her without deciding to. The way it does for people who have earned the right to move through a space. I walked to the livery. My horse was fine. They'd kept him well enough. Das, a 12-year-old buckskin with an opinion about everything, turned his head when I came into his stall and gave me the look he always gave me, a long, even look that said he'd known I'd turn up eventually. I put my head against his neck and stood there for a while without moving. Didn't have to explain anything. He already had a sense of things. Sundown found me at Tall Bear's camp on the eastern edge of Millhaven. A modest camp, 3 fires, the horses on a picket line, the riders settling in for the night with the ease of men who have camped 1,000 times. Tall Bear sat near the main fire with 2 of his men, and he gestured for me to sit, and I sat. Through Ketch's Wind, his interpreter, a young man who translated with a kind of careful precision that told me he took the responsibility seriously, we talked for the better part of 2 hours. I laid out what I had on Buell, all of it. The well poisonings along the Laramie route, the forged grazing allotment disputes, the 2 ranchers who'd sold under threat when they couldn't prove the threat and then lost everything anyway. The name of the man in the Territorial Land Office who Buell had in his pocket. The timing of the barn fires relative to the refusal of sale offers. Tall Bear listened. He asked questions through Ketch's Wind, quiet and methodical, and the questions told me his mind was working 3 steps ahead of where we were in the conversation. He knew things about Buell's operation that I didn't, how Buell had been approaching the federal grazing allotments on the northern range near the reservation boundary, how 2 different territorial officials had made visits to the Powder River camp in the past year, asking questions about land use that had nothing to do with the questions they claimed they were asking. Buell had been testing his northern flank, testing what resistance he'd meet from that direction. Between the 2 of us, we built a picture of the whole enterprise that was cleaner and more complete than anything either of us had had alone. The woman sat across the fire from me. She listened through most of it without speaking. Twice she asked questions. The first was about the timing of the land office transactions, which I knew well. She'd seen something in the pattern I'd described that I hadn't caught, and when she laid it out it was right. The second was about the barn fires, whether I had the dates in writing or only in memory. I had them in writing. I told her where. When it was late enough that the talking was done, Ketch's Wind translated Tall Bear's final word on it. My father says Prout told him one more thing before he died. He said Frey had been ready to give you evidence that would have ended Buell entirely. Not just the killing, the whole operation. Every piece of it. My father says this means Buell was very afraid of you, very afraid of what you had built. I sat with that a moment. My father says, Ketch's Wind continued, that a man who makes the corrupt afraid is a man who is doing something worth doing. He says this to you in respect, and he says he hopes the work is not finished. I looked across the fire at Tall Bear. He was watching me with old dark eyes that had seen a great deal and were not fooled by much. Tell him it's not finished, I said. Tell him I intend to finish it. Ketch's Wind translated. Tall Bear listened and then made a short sound that I took, correctly, I'd learn later as the Lakota equivalent of good. The others drifted off as the night came on. The fires burned lower. And after a while it was just me and the woman sitting on that side of the coals, and the camp quiet around us, and the sky enormous overhead. "You're a healer," I said, "not a question." "Among other things," she said. "My mother was, I learned from her." "Did you try to help Prout?" "Yes," she looked at the coals. "He was too far gone, but he was more comfortable at the end. He died without as much pain as he might have." The fire shifted. "That matters," I said. She nodded. She seemed to agree without needing to say so. I'd been sitting on something since the jail cell. Since she'd answered my question about why she came, the partial answer, the answer she'd given, and the one she'd held back. I turned it over now and decided to ask it plain. "There's something you didn't tell me," I said, "this morning when I asked why you came yourself." She was quiet, watching the coals. "You can say it's not my business," I said. "No," she said, "I'll tell you." She thought for another moment. "Prout said your name the way a man says a name when the name stands for something, not just who you are, what you stood for. He was dying and he was frightened and he was ashamed, and in the middle of all that he said your name like it was something he was holding onto." She paused. I wanted to see the man whose name could be held onto like that by a dying man who had done wrong. I wanted to see if he was real. I looked at her across the fire. "And," I said. She met my eyes. Her face was quiet in the firelight, not performing anything, just open. "He's real," she said. There was nothing to say to that. I sat with it instead. Let it be what it was. For 3 weeks I'd been a condemned man, a wrong answer, a name on a list of problems to be dealt with. And here was this woman looking at me across a fire and saying the word real like it was something she'd needed to find out and was glad she had, and I didn't know how to carry that yet. Just knew it was mine to carry now. The nighthawks called out in the dark. The horses moved on the line. "I'll ride back to Millhaven tomorrow," I said. "Work with Aldine on the Buell case. Try to finish it properly." "Yes," she said. "Your father mentioned ranchers on the Powder who might come forward, if they're willing to give sworn testimony." "I'll ask them," she said. "I know 2 of them. My father trades with them both. I'll ask and I'll take their statements if they'll give them." "You can do that, take a sworn statement." She looked at me with a faint something at the corner of her mouth that I'd learned was as close as she usually got to rye. "I can write," she said. "I can witness. I learned both." "I know," I said. I didn't mean." "I know what you meant," she said. "Yes, I can take their statements. I'll bring them to you when I have them." We talked for a while after that about nothing much in particular. The winter coming, how the grass had been, a flooding on the Powder 2 years back that had changed the northern grazing range in ways that still hadn't worked themselves out. The kind of talking that happens between people when the important things have been said, and neither of them is ready to end the evening yet. When I finally stood to go, she stood too. Her blanket coat was closed against the cold that had come all the way in now, the kind of cold that gets into the ground and stays. "I'll come back through your father's camp," I said, "when the case is further along, not on business." She looked at me with those level eyes. "My father would offer you dinner," she said. "And you?" She thought about it, or pretended to think about it. I'd learn later that she'd already decided. "I would sit across the fire from you," she said, "and talk until it was too late to ride back." The fire moved between us. I put out my hand the way I had with her father. She looked at it a moment and then she took it and we shook, and her hand was firm and warm and she held it a beat longer than she had to. Just a beat. Then she let go. I walked to where Doss was tied at the edge of camp, and I rode back to Millhaven under a sky full of stars with the badge in my shirt pocket, and the cold on my face, and something moving in my chest that I couldn't name right then. I let it move. Some things you don't try to name while they're still new. You let them come to you in their own time, the way the light comes in the morning, and you trust it's real even before you can quite see it. Buell was arrested the following afternoon. His man, a drifter named Cole who'd done the killing in the alley, was brought in from a ranch south of town 6 days later. He'd been drinking hard since the morning Tall Bear rode into the square, which told you he'd known that morning what it meant. His confession took about 20 minutes to get, and he gave it with the look of a man who's relieved to have it out, which I've seen before and never quite understood, but I've seen it. Holt resigned his judgeship within the week, didn't wait for the circuit court to come to him, just wrote a letter and cleared his desk and left. I considered that one of the few sensible decisions he'd ever made. The case itself took 3 months to finish properly. Aldine was a thorough man. He was building something that would hold under any scrutiny, and he didn't rush it, and I respected that even when it was slow. I rode the Powder River Range twice, talking to ranchers, gathering documents, building the chain of evidence that would make the whole thing airtight from any angle a defense attorney might try. On my second ride, I came back through Tall Bear's camp, the way I'd said I would. She was there. She'd known somehow, through some communication I didn't ask too closely about, when I'd be coming, and she met me at the edge of camp, and she had coffee in a tin cup that she handed to me when I stepped down from DOS. We sat by her fire. I told her where the case stood. She had things for me too. The 2 ranchers had agreed to testify, and she'd taken their statements herself, careful and clear as any legal document I'd seen, folded in oilcloth to keep them through weather. She handed them to me and I looked them over, and they were good, better than good. I looked at her across the fire. There were things I'd been sitting with on those long rides, things that came to me in the quiet of early morning in cold camps, or at night with the wind at the tent walls. I thought about a woman who'd ridden 15 miles through the dark with a dead man's testimony, because a man she'd never met was being killed for a thing he didn't do. I thought about her hands steady on those papers in the jail cell. I thought about the way she'd looked at me across the fire, and said the word real like it was a conclusion she'd reached and was giving me plainly, with no decoration on it. I thought about this work I did and what it had cost and what it still required, and whether it left room for anything else, whether I wanted room for anything else. I thought about the creek from my boyhood, and the smell of coffee, and the way Das leaned his head against me in the cold. All the things I'd thought about in the cell when I was making peace with never having them again. "I'm not an easy man," I said. She smiled then, a small, dry, real smile. "I know. The work. I know what the work is," she said. "I've been watching you do it." I stopped. She looked at me directly. "Do you have something to say to me, Cord, or are you telling me about yourself?" Nobody had said my name like that, plain and sure, like it was mine and she had the right to it. "Both," I said. She waited. She was very good at waiting. "I'd like to come back to this camp," I said, "when the case is finished, not on business, just to come." She was quiet for a moment. The fire moved. "My father would offer you dinner," she said. "We covered that." "And I would sit across the fire from you," she said, "and talk until it was too late to ride back. We covered that too." She looked at me. "Is that what you're asking?" "It's a start of what I'm asking," I said. She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she reached across and turned the badge where it lay on the log between us, turning it so the star caught the firelight. "Come back when it's done," she said. "We'll see what comes next." I nodded. The fire burned between us, low and steady. She reached out then, not sudden, not making a thing of it, and put her hand over mine where it rested on the log beside the badge. Her hand was warm. She held it there, easy and certain, the way you set your hand on something you've decided about. I turned my hand over. We sat like that for a while, with the camp going quiet around us and the stars coming out and the fire burning down to coals. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. Some things don't need talking to be real. They just need a person willing to sit still long enough to let them be what they are. The night came all the way in. We didn't move.